A brutal road trip finally comes to an end with one more loss, but the bigger news, Francisco Alvarez was demoted to AAA.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. This is the only podcast that covers the Mets 7 days a week throughout the regular season. If you want to find some of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Now, there's not much to discuss about the Mets game on Sunday night. They did not score against Jesus Luzardo. It was not until in the later innings when Francisco Lindor hit a solo homer that the Mets even got on the board, as they were just completely baffled by Luzardo. And on the other side of things, David Peterson had his first bad start of the season. He had not given up more than 3 earned runs all year. He had not been pulled before the 5th inning all year. Every single start this season, he had at least pitched into the 5th inning. He went 4 2/3 in one start where he didn't complete that 5th inning. And you also look at it, he completed 6 or more innings in 9 of his first 14 starts, completed 7 in 4 of his last 5. And he just had a brutal 4th inning in this game. And that defined the game for the Mets. That paired with the other side of it again, which was Jesus Luzardo, who was great. In that 4th inning, David Peterson, who hadn't given up a home run in 49 innings, allows a leadoff homer to Kyle Schwarber. And then later in the inning, a 5-run rally is capped by an Edmundo Sosa 3-run homer. Both of those homers came on hanging sliders. He started missing up and away to righties, just lost command. And again, just a bad start. I don't think we have to take much from it. I would say I jinxed it because on yesterday's show, I talked about how David Peterson was one of the few pitchers the Mets had left in this rotation whose stuff was able to play in the zone. And then, of course, he gets hit hard. So fine, put it on me. But to me, this is really a moment where the Mets could have stolen a series and just kind of shaken off what was a brutal stretch of baseball, and it still is a brutal stretch of baseball. Would have been had they even won this game. But if they were able to sort of pull that rabbit out of the hat and beat the Phillies in the series and keep a lead in this division, it would have been maybe a Band-Aid over something that's brewing more over the surface, more of a bullet wound that's happening right now to this rotation, where the Mets have to figure some things out, and they have to find a way to get back on track and not let this season start to slip. There's still only one game back in the division. They still have a lead in the wild card race. This team has plenty of time to get on track, but they're playing bad baseball, and it can't be ignored. And a lot of injuries have mounted here where guys need to step up. Things have to change, and that eventually leads you to make some tough decisions like demoting Francisco Alvarez. And I really wanted to sort of fly through the game recap because what else is there? And if you want more on the game recap, you can check out what Chris Schubert talked about on the Locked On Mets postcast on your podcast feed or your YouTube channel. I should make sure Chris did a show before I plug something here, but he does shows after pretty much every single Mets game outside of day games during the week where he has work, and I usually step in and fill in for him. Yeah, he did a show, Back to Reality. So you can check that out if you want more of an in-depth game recap. But the big news for the day that we really have to focus on is the fact that the Mets have optioned their 23-year-old starting catcher, Francisco Alvarez. Now, Alvarez has plenty of options. He has never been optioned. He came up, made his debut at the end of the 2022 season in that series against the Braves. 2023, he ends up on the roster after what happened there that brought him up. I'm trying to remember. It was an injury, right? And then he just didn't let go of the job. Was it Narvaez that went down? I honestly cannot recall exactly what opened the door. I believe it was Narvaez, but regardless of who got hurt in 2023, Alvarez came up, assumed the job. And while there's been an injury here, an injury there, he he hasn't looked back, and he has always been on the big league roster whenever healthy. So he had 3 options. He had all of his options left. The Mets are choosing to exercise one because the guy has not looked like himself this year. And if you want to look at the stats, you can see that the offense hasn't been there. You can see the defensive metrics have dropped. And you can even look at the game record with each catcher. Now, there is some overlap because these guys sometimes will finish a game they didn't start. But this season, games where Luis Torrens plays, the Mets are 28-17. Games where Francisco Alvarez plays, they're 19-16. So they have been better with Torrens behind the dish. I think if you've watched the games, it's been pretty evident that Luis Torrens has been a better defensive catcher. I think Torrens' offensive production has been overstated a little bit here because he has not been drastically better than Francisco Alvarez. Let me pull up the stats to know for sure. You look this year, Alvarez, which is funny because he did homer on Saturday, and then they make the move to option him. But he's got a 652 OPS, Torrens 639 OPS. So actually based on OPS, based on average, based on base, based on slug, Francisco Alvarez has been better than Luis Torrens this season across the board. Doesn't feel like that, but that's the reality of the numbers. This year, Alvarez is still a better hitter, and this is not Luis Torrens has earned the starting catching job. That's not what this is. But Carlos Mendoza said it before the game. Torrens has earned playing time with his defense. I mean, he didn't say it as bluntly as with his defense, but he said Torrens has been earning playing time. And if these guys are getting towards a 50-50 split, the Mets felt like Francisco Alvarez just wasn't getting enough playing time and wasn't capitalizing on his MLB playing time to show what the Mets wanted to see for him to be playing at a consistent level. There just hasn't been consistent play from Alvarez defensively and offensively. And I know I said it, I think, in my short that I did reacting to the news on YouTube, but I'll say it again. I was wrong because I had other listeners on from the show that were either sending me texts on subtext from our Locked On Mets insiders, or leaving comments on the YouTube channel or on Twitter on posts saying, when is Francisco Alvarez going to get optioned? And I didn't believe it was going to happen because ultimately I felt like the alternative of Hayden Sanger coming up makes the Mets worse. And I do think the Mets are a worse team today than they were yesterday with Francisco Alvarez on the roster. But this is about being a better team in the second half. And I think the Mets are looking at a window right now of 3 weeks before the All-Star break to see what playing every day can do for Francisco Alvarez. And the hope is by playing every single day in Syracuse, and I'm sure he won't catch every day, but when he's not catching, he can DH. And so you're going to get him a ton of at-bats. You're going to try to ramp up this, struggle, this transitionary period. I don't even know what to call it, but this point in time where Alvarez needs to get his swing right. You're trying to speed run through that because you aren't going to play him every single day at the big league level and force feed him DH at bats. I did recommend that the Mets did that on occasion just to see if they can spark him and turn him into a hitter. Now they do that in the comforts of Syracuse, away from everything, get him a bunch of time and give him an objective to push for. Francisco Alvarez does not want to be playing baseball in Syracuse. It said he took the demotion very well. He was a professional about it, but he didn't say much. This guy wants to be back. This guy wants to be in the mix. This guy wants to be impacting winning for the New York Mets. So this is going to give him something to push for. 3 weeks in Syracuse, the way I look at it. And if he does what he's supposed to, he'll be back after the All-Star break. And I think the Mets are going to be fine with their catching situation. And hopefully he can turn in a big second half and be a difference maker for this team. They believe in him that much. That's why they're demoting him, because they believe that there's more that he can get to. And he's not just going to be a guy that never amounts to his potential because he's just, good enough to be a catcher in the big leagues, but not good enough to be a difference maker with the bat. They still believe in the bat. This is going to give him an opportunity to be better. And also it's going to allow him to work a little bit on his defense. I think part of it is just being overwhelmed this year with so much, and that's maybe why the defense has slipped. I don't think that there's anything physically that could explain the regression when it comes to the defense. I think it's more of a mental thing. So hopefully this demotion just locks Alvarez back into gear, and when he comes up, he'll be a player that can really move the needle for the Mets again. In the meantime, though, again, they do sort of get worse. So the question is, what else are the Mets going to do to break out of this? Is there another move to be made with this roster, or do they have to just try to keep their heads above water until some reinforcements come off the injured list. We're going to go through that a little bit more in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. Are you looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Well, crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios, one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, give you 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber, better fuel, and saturated fats to help you feel fuller longer. I love personally the no shells variety of Wonderful Pistachios, particularly the smoky barbecue flavor, but I also like the honey roasted. That was my go-to for a long time. Sea salt and pepper. There's so many different flavors that you can choose from with the no shells varieties. You also have the in-shell varieties, which are a classic favorite. If you love cracking open every shell, they have that option available to you. Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein, providing all 9 essential amino acids. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 14,000 subscribers. Going back to last season, we all remember what happened with the players-only meeting and the turnaround for the Mets, but the real thing that put the Mets into a different stratosphere as a team, along with Lindor being an MVP and everything else, was a real roster turnover midseason. The Mets sort of crumbled up the playbook they had been using. They threw it out and they said, all right, we got to do some things differently. David Peterson had started, I believe, that game where Jorge Lopez launched his glove into the stands. And with Peterson on the roster, the Mets decided to send Christian Scott down and bring up Daniel Nunez. Daniel Nunez had a couple of cameos with the Mets that season that looked great, but because of a roster crunch with a 6-man rotation, he was unable to stay in the big league bullpen. The Mets send down Christian Scott, go to a 5-man rotation with David Peterson, Jose Quintana, Luis Severino, Sean Manaea, and Tyler McGill. That rotation takes off. Nunez helps the bullpen. The Mets also demote Brett Beatty, give Mark Vientos the keys to third base, call up Jose Iglesias. OMG hits the Mets. There was the grimace thing, and then everything, sort of snowballed from there. Also, speaking of Francisco Alvarez going down, the Mets trade for Luis Torrens. They dump Omar Narvaez. And then when Alvarez is ready to return off the injured list, they dump Tomas Nido. So then it becomes an Alvarez-Torrens tandem that we've seen ever since with the backstop situation. Again, the 5-man rotation as described. Nunez in the bullpen, Vientos as a newfound start, third base. And the Mets had an incredible run. I don't know if they have that many moves to make right now. Now, granted, at the time, we wouldn't have known that Iglesias coming up was going to be a big deal, or Luis Torrens, the guy they traded $100,000 to get, was going to make such a big impact. But all those little moves did make a difference. So now we look at where the Mets roster is at. First big move, demote Francisco Alvarez, at least for now, and bring up Hayden Sanger to be another glove first catcher for you. And obviously that's going to result in more playing time for Torrens. Well, if you look at where the Mets are at right now, they're still only a game out of first in the division. They're 3.5 games up in the wild card race. So a big difference between this year and last year is they aren't in a huge hole. They're still in the driver's seat. They still are in a prime position to make the playoffs, but they have to break out of this. If they have another bad week, all of a sudden we might be looking and be like, oh, wow, the Mets aren't even in the first wild card spot. They have fallen down. They're holding on to the last wild card spot, and they got a game lead. The team that's chasing them right now, as far as the team that's right on the outside looking in this wild card race, is the Padres. There's some good teams that are in the mix still. So just making the playoffs should not be taken for granted. The Mets have a lot of work to do, but they're in a much better spot. So when you look at this roster and what's changing, well, they've just gotten completely destroyed by injuries to their rotation, but they're getting guys back. So the first big change that's coming now is the addition of Frankie Montas this week and the addition potentially next week of Sean Manaea. This week, you got Paul Blackburn, Montas, Holmes, Canning, Peterson, back to Blackburn, and Montas again. So 4 of your 7 starts this week are going to be taken by Paul Blackburn and Frankie Montas. I don't love that. I don't. But you get through this week. The final 3 games of the week are going to be played against the Pirates. The Braves have not been good on the road. We're going to preview that series in the next segment. But the hope is the Mets can Again, keep their head above water this week, and then they potentially get their ace back next week with Manaea maybe needing only one more rehab start. And I think Manaea will make a big difference for this rotation. At that point, it'll be Manaea, Holmes, Canning, Peterson, and then likely a Montas, Blackburn, maybe tandem situation, or Blackburn goes right back to the bullpen. And when you look at the bullpen, Edwin Diaz, Reed Garrett, Huascar Brazaban, Jose Budo. 4 guys in the pen that you trust. That's a very good start. Ryan Stanek isn't going anywhere now. He has struggled, though. If you end up with 6 starters in the rotation, or again, 5 starters in the rotation, a piggyback situation, or just Blackburn in the bullpen, that is one less arm for that pen. So all of a sudden, 6 of 8 slots are taken. Jose Castillo has been okay. I don't think they're going to demote him. Or not demote him. They can't demote him. I don't think they're going to DFA him anytime soon. I don't think he's the answer when it comes to left-handed relievers for the Mets, but you got Brooks Raley on a rehab assignment. Maybe you can get him back right around the deadline. You might have an idea of what he's going to be to your bullpen once you get to that point. Right now, it's been a couple appearances in St. Lucie. Not much to read into yet, but we'll see how that goes. Daniel Nunez looked okay. At least he was living in the zone on Sunday. Chris Devansky actually continues to pitch well. I don't know if there's a big move coming for this bullpen. I don't know if I can see one on the horizon when it comes to their farm system, or Syracuse. Is there an arm that is throwing the ball exceptionally well that can make a huge impact? There's not one that's jumping out. I will say last year the Mets made a trade on July 9th for Phil Maton. So could David Stern strike early again to pick up a reliever? That'll be interesting to see if there is something that can present itself. I will say the Mets made a mistake this offseason. They should have, in retrospect, hindsight's 2020, picked up Maton's option, and they shouldn't have signed Ryan Stanek, or they should have brought back Maton instead of Stanek. Because Phil Maton's been unbelievable this year for the Cardinals. A 1.84 ERA, he's striking out 12 batters per 9. He's been so good, and Stanek has not been. So that's definitely a mistake here. But regardless, I don't think the Mets have to do too much to reshape this bullpen. I think they're going to have to add an arm or two at the deadline. I don't know if that comes early, but I think this bullpen, if they were getting better starting pitching, the 4 guys they have with Diaz, Brazaban, Garrett, and Budo, that's a better group than they probably ever had last season, even at the end of the year. If you think about when the Mets were at their best on that run, yes, Maton was good for stretches. Nunez was good for stretches. Budo was good for stretches. Diaz had his moments, but I don't know if that group last year was as good as this group, because for one, Edwin Diaz is pitching much better this year than he did last year. And I just think that overall, I'm not going to be too concerned at this moment about the bullpen, because I think they had the guys to get the job done. But look at this lineup. Lindor, Nimmo, Soto, Alonso, McNeil. Those 5 are going to drive the ship, and hopefully they can lead the Mets to a lot of wins this week, and they can really hit. But there is a lot of question marks at the bottom of this lineup. And a lot of times now it's turning into one of those lineups where you get to 6, 7, 8, 9, and there's not a prayer. You're just hoping they can pass the baton as quick as possible, maybe draw a walk, get a base hit, just get through that bottom of the lineup and turn it over to the top. They need to get some length in this lineup. And Mark Vientos has to be the answer, because I don't know what the answer is otherwise. There's no Jose Iglesias waiting in the wings this year. There's nothing else in Syracuse to look for. There's Vientos on rehab so far, and he hasn't hit well. He's 2 for 17. Mets could still bring him back on Monday if they want to, if he checks out with the health. I feel like it sort of sounds as if they might give him a couple more games to try to get his legs under him a little bit more, to try to see some positive results in AAA before he comes back up to the show. But regardless of if he sees them in Syracuse or not, at some point this week or next, Vientos will be back, and the Mets have to find some level of production offensively from the third base spot and the DH spot. Now, Marte's been good, but when it's not Marte, it hasn't been good. And I don't know how much you can ride a 37-year-old Starling Marte. So they need Mark Vientos to hit. There's no doubt about that. If not, they're going to have to be very aggressive, adding a bat or 2 at the deadline. Jesse Winker is still out. Jose Siri, when he comes back, is not going to do anything for you offensively. It's just not. So when you look at what options are waiting in the wings, unless Jet Williams is going to fly up here from AA, which haven't even brought him up to AAA yet, talked about that on yesterday's show, where is the help coming from the minor leagues? There really isn't any. Alvarez maybe when he comes back, but Vientos has to be the guy. And once Vientos comes up, personally, I would demote Ronnie Mauricio. I would let him play every day in Syracuse to try to get his bat right and have him shake off this rust to see if he can be a player for you this year. I would roll with Vientos every single day when he's not starting at third base. Plug him in at DH, have Marte DH against left-handed pitching, put Vientos at third base against lefties, put him at DH against righties, have Beatty play all the other games basically at third base, because right now, from now until the deadline, what the Mets have to figure out is what they have with those two players. And it feels like that's a perpetual conversation we have with this Mets team over the last 3 years, but they got to figure it out, because if these guys are not going to be the answer this year, again, they're going to have to make some big moves at the deadline. Ultimately, when you look at where this roster's at, when you look at what's coming or what's not coming, the rotation, that's got some reinforcements on the way. The hope is Montas can start pitching better once he's up in the show, and Manaea can be that dude again. And with Manaea, Peterson, Holmes, Canning, Montas, maybe you can have a stabilized rotation from now until the deadline. And then once you get there, you're either making a move, or also you might have Kodai Senga coming back into the mix. And that could be a big difference maker for the Mets. The bullpen, they're going to keep cycling arms, but they just need guys like Reed Garrett to pitch better, and he's been great all year. It was maybe just a bad week, just a couple of things that went wrong for the Mets. If he gets back on track, this bullpen gets back on track, they're fine. The lineup, not a lot coming, so Vientos has to be the guy. He has to be the answer, and then you need a Beatty to step up. You need to continue to get some production from a Tyrone Taylor. You need Terrence to do his thing a little bit from the catcher spot. Maybe playing more frequently, he'll be able to hit a little bit better like we saw earlier in the season. That's where the Mets are at right now. Not a lot that can be done, but I think that emotion of Francisco Alvarez showed that they're committed to doing everything they can to get this team to be at its absolute optimal level for that stretch run. If Alvarez comes back and he's a player to be reckoned with, that's going to be a huge difference maker for this team, and hopefully some other things can sort of solve themselves before you get to that deadline. But you never know. This might be a team that has to be uber aggressive to put together a roster that can really make a run. But I'm not going to panic too much from what's been an awful 10-game stretch or 10-day stretch. The Mets have to break out of this thing, and I expect that this will be a better week, and I want to tell you why a little bit more in the next segment. Going to preview what lies ahead, Mets versus Braves, and also a bunch of minor league promotions to run through as well. So we got a lot to cover in this final segment. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing. Whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or a high-stakes game of soccer, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburn on the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways that you can bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and it makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. Whether I'm placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet right into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I am part of the action. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel Sportsbook app or visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're an everydayer that's always tuning into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. It's our texting service where you can get updates from me anytime news breaks from the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime, take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways. You can line graphics sent to your phone each day so you know who's in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Let's talk a little bit about the Atlanta Braves in this upcoming series. They made a move on Friday to promote one of their top prospects, Didier Fuentes, a 20-year-old. The reason why they promoted him was because they wanted to push back Spencer Schwellenbach to not pitch in the Marlins series because they just had to roll out Schwellenbach, Sale, and Strider again to face the New York Mets. And it would have been that. But instead, Chris Sale is on the injured list. Now, I am not typically one to be glad about injuries, but what I will say, for one, how he got injured, he made that diving play in the ninth inning. He broke a rib, which is crazy. It's a 5-0 game. The Braves pushed Chris Sale to 120 pitches, or nearly, I think 116 pitches. Finished the game with a broken rib, which is pretty impressive. But what I will say is it's a little bit interesting how it all worked out, where the Braves have basically done everything they can to put the best foot forward against the Mets, and they really catered their entire rotation, pushing Sale's starts back so that he could go in the series against the Mets on like 8 days rest, pushing Schwellenbach back, who's an absolute horse, who you want starting every 5th day for you because he is that type of guy that can be a workhorse for you. And what is the result of it all? Where are the Braves at as you go into this 4-game series? Unfortunately for them, Chris Sale on the injured list. Who knows how long it's going to take for a broken rib to heal. And Didier Fuentes, who you forced up early, now all of a sudden he's in the rotation. Not to mention you lost your series against the Marlins. Doesn't every win count the same? I imagine if Spencer Schwellenbach pitched in that series, maybe they would have won that series against the Marlins. Instead, they lose the first game and the third game in the series. They've been brutal on the road this year. I think that's what the Mets at this point have to hope continues, because you look at this Braves team at home, they're 22-15. When they swept the Mets, I said, oh, it feels like we're back. Then you go and you lose a series to the Marlins. So are the Mets going to ever see that version of the Braves team that disappoints all season? Or are they just going to snap into gear every time they see the Mets and then fall back into being a bottom dweller? Who knows what this season has in store for this Braves team? But when you look at the splits, at home, they're 22-15. On the road, they're 13-26. Only the Pirates, White Sox, and Rockies have a worse record on the road this season, and those are the 3 worst teams in baseball. So on the road, the Braves have been brutal. They do have Schwellenbach and Strider going against Blackburn and Montas to start off this series. So huge edge to the Braves to start things out. But the Mets, who have been good at home this year, they weren't good against the Rays, but the Rays are, or, well, I don't know if they still are, but they were definitely the highest team in baseball. And I'm pretty sure the Rays went to Detroit and did some things against the Tigers as well. Let's see what they've done since they played the Mets. They went to Baltimore, took 2 of 4. Are you kidding me? The Orioles got 2 against them? Oh, baseball's fun. Then they went into, the Tigers, my bad. It was a homestand. So the Orioles came into Tampa, the Rays lost 2 of 4. Then the Tigers came to town and they took 2 of 3 against the Tigers, who have been one of the best teams in baseball this season. But regardless, the Mets had been good at home all season before they got swept by the Rays. Hopefully they fall back into those winning ways, shock us, and win one of these first 2 games, despite what looks like on paper a pretty big disadvantage when it comes to the pitching matchups. Game 3, it'll be Clay Holmes versus that prospect, Didier Fuentes, who got knocked around a little bit by the Marlins. Hopefully the Mets can do something similar. And then Game 4, it'll be Grant Holmes for the Braves versus Griffin Canning. You look at this week, you look at the road ahead, I think to me it's pretty simple. This is a week where the Mets should win 5 games, because after this 4-game set at home, you go on the road, but you face the Pirates. So the Mets have to take advantage of playing bad teams. And when it comes to the Braves on the road, they've been a bad team, but particularly over the weekend against the Pirates next weekend coming up here, they should take advantage. So win 5 games. What does that mean to me? Either you win each series or you take 2 of 4 against the Braves and you sweep the Pirates and make up for not beating the Braves in this first series. But the Mets have to have a better week this week. Otherwise, we're going to continue to have some tough conversations, and this season can start to slide on you quick. And so you just don't want to see that happening. But all we can do at this point is watch the games and see if this team can sustain some winning again. I hope that this really was just running into the wrong team, in the Rays at home, and then just the Braves had a perfectly played series for them, and the Phillies are a better team right now. Doesn't mean they'll be a better team all season. It just means at this very moment, with the state of the Mets pitching staff and the way they've been playing lately, the Phillies have their number this weekend. But I think it can all turn around very quickly, and I hope it does against the Braves this week at Citi Field. Now, quick run through of a ton of minor league promotions. The Mets brought 2 arms up to AAA, Alex Carrillo and Luis Moreno. Moreno, I think this is more just to get a depth arm up to AAA. He might end up going back down to AA. A guy that's been a starting pitcher the last couple of years. This year, with a loaded rotation in Binghamton, he's been pitching out of the bullpen. He's got a 4.5 ERA and 34 innings pitched. Not anything that really stands out from him that makes me think he can be a guy for the Mets this year. Carrillo, though, an interesting one, 28 years old. He was signed to the Frontier League. This is where David Stearns and company are doing their work on guys who are pitching in leagues that we're not even paying attention to. So Carrillo, he throws hard. He had 30 strikeouts this year and 19 and a third innings pitched. Gave up 6 runs in his first 4 appearances. Since then, 3 runs in his last 14 and a third innings pitched. That's a 1.88 ERA in AA lately. So now he'll go up to AAA, see how it works. And if he looks really good, you never know. We could see Carrillo this year. When it comes to top prospects, though, the big news, Jacob Reimer and Carson Benj finally get the call up to AA. Reimer hit 284 in high A this year, 384 on base, 502 slug, 8 home runs, and it's tough to go yard in that ballpark, particularly for a left-handed hitter. Reimer's a righty, but still, it's not easy for anyone to go yard with the wind blowing in off Coney Island. But Reimer went yard 8 times, 18 doubles, 4 triples, 11 stolen bases on 13 attempts. That's a new element to his game that he did not have prior to this season. An 886 OPS. Benj, the Mets' first-round pick from last year, hitting 302, 417 on base, 480 slug. Again, I talked about how that ballpark can sap the power, particularly from left-handed hitters. Benj is a lefty. Racked up 18 doubles, 5 triples, and 4 home runs. 15 stolen bases on 17 attempts. 897 OPS while playing good defense in center field. So these are 2 very important prospects in the Mets system, 2 top 10 guys at this point. Benj, definitely a top 5 guy. You can make a case he's a top 3 prospect in the system. Now they both head up to AA. And if you look at their season in the South Atlantic League, they were 3rd and 4th in OPS in the league. So they were 2 of the best hitters in that league they were playing in. Now they get a chance to go up and play the rest of the season likely in AA. Colin Houck, another Mets first-round pick, got the call up to high A. Houck has had a real resurgence this season, had a brutal first season last year, had a rough start in April, had a 678 OPS. But in May, he turned that around to an 840 OPS. And in June, he was rocking a 935 OPS. Put it all together for the season, 252 average, 351 on base, 461 slugging percentage. So he has that OPS on the season over 800. 14 doubles, 5 triples, 8 home runs, 11 stolen bases on 13 attempts. He's been playing some shortstop, of course. He was drafted as a shortstop, but also a good amount of third base. So this is what I was actually talking about on yesterday's show, how sometimes you see sort of a chain in promotions. This is certainly a chain where you promote Reimer up to AA, and that clears some playing time in the Brooklyn lineup to bring Houck along and see what he can do against tougher competition. There is a chance that Houck is going to struggle making this jump because he really had a big adjustment curve that he had to go through in St. Lucie. It took over a year to figure that out. Now we'll see how the changes he has made can translate to a tougher level, but he is definitely salvaging some of his prospect status. I mean, the kid was drafted out of high school. We're only a couple years into his professional career. No one was ever giving up on him, but it's good to see him finally getting some results, and he might turn into a pretty solid player after all. You got to remember, this guy was a 2-sport star in high school who had some offers from some really good schools to go be a quarterback in college. So you know this is a great athlete, and he's starting to put it all together as a baseball player with the recent success in St. Lucie. So it'll be good to see what he can do now in high A. That's going to be all for this edition of Locked On Mets. On tomorrow's show, I'll be breaking down whatever happens Mets versus Braves Game 1. And, of course, we'll always keep our eye on the minor league system, see what's going on there. Mark Vientos, will continue to keep tabs on him. He won't be playing on Monday night in Syracuse. If he's going to play, it's with the Mets, but we won't know if the Mets are going to make that call until then. So I will be breaking down that as well on Tuesday's edition of Locked On Mets. As always, thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you follow, rate, review wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me on social media at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets if you want to be a Locked On Mets insider. Find a link in the episode description to go to subtext.com/Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen, your first watch every day. Now, for your second watch, check out Locked On MLB Game Night, the show that takes you around all the action in Major League Baseball with insight from all of our local experts. You can find Locked On MLB Game Night on the Locked On MLB YouTube channel, as well as the Locked On MLB podcast feed.